Welcome, and thanks for attending today's webinar. We're going to be talking about changing public services to deliver great customer experience. I'm Caroline Boyd. I'm a principal of government programs here at Meritalk. And in my former life, I was the Assistant Secretary of Technology for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I come to this moderator role having been on both sides of the public-private discussion. So before I introduce our panel, I have a couple very quick housekeeping items for those of you watching today. The program will be available on demand following the conclusion of the discussion. And if you have any questions for any of our speakers as you participate today, feel free to submit them using the Q&A box. Speakers will respond to questions via email. So as we get ready to dive into the program, I, of course, want to thank our sponsor for today's program, Payit. We cannot do these types of programs without public-private partnership, and we sincerely appreciate their participation and look forward to their input as part of the discussion. So we're going to talk with our panel about how government organizations can simplify modernization efforts. Everybody is working hard at that, but how do we deliver new and impactful customer experiences? So I'd like to quickly introduce the panel. We'll get into our discussion, and I'm going to ask each of you to share just a little bit more about your background and what is your current main focus. So first, we've got Kelly Davis Fellner. Kelly is the Chief Marketing Officer for Payit. Kelly, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Great to meet everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I lead marketing for Payit and have been a tech marketer for a long time, both working in sort of business and public sector, but then also with end users. And a big part of my role at Payit is partnering with our clients to help them devise kind of marketing strategies to help drive adoption of digital service delivery. And that's, really honestly the most fun part of my job, because we get to go and sit down with cities and counties and states and say, hey, how do we talk about this to your community so that folks will give it a try, and ultimately, they'll see some of that channel shift that they're driving for when they adopt a digital service delivery model.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. We're going to be talking with Michael Sandor. Michael is the Director of Digital Government Services, which is part of the Division of Program Management for South Carolina's Department of Administration. Tell me if I got that right, Michael.
You did. You did better than I would have done with that. Thank you. I appreciate also the opportunity to be with you all. Just a little bit about my background. I come to you all as a project manager by trade and technology projects specifically, and worked in private sector and healthcare and on both sides of the coin, if you will. And as I sit now in the Digital Government Services Office, Program Office here at the State of South Carolina, our goal is to enable technologies, deliver new services, and hopefully close that gap between the citizen experience that they have in their private lives versus the one that they have when they are working with their government entities. So glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And actually, it's appropriate that you would mention the experience, because we're also joined by Ashley Lehman. Ashley is the Chief Experience Officer for the Department of Information Technology for the state of Maryland. And certainly we're seeing a lot more folks with that title now, Ashley. It's obviously been raised up in its importance level across state and localities, and we're glad to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. They may be raised in importance level, but I still get the question of what do you do all the time. But what I do, really, I look at customers at the Department of Information Technology. I look at customers kind of twofold, both as a service provider to other state agencies for IT services. I look at the customers being those other agencies and units of state government. And so I focus a lot on how our agency can deliver better customer service. How can we understand the needs of our customers? We have a team of business relationship managers that their sole focus is to serve as that point of escalation, but also that strategic partner for our customers in order to develop good solutions for them. The other sort of hat I wear is I oversee the programs that DO administers for our customer facing or citizen facing portals. So we have a one-stop portal and also an OpenGov portal as well, where the goal of those things is to make doing business with the government more digitized and easy to access for those citizens.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great lead in actually to my warm-up question for everyone, which is basically, what you're talking about, Ashley, we're seeing across lots of government agencies, which is that goal, the end goal is to improve customer service and citizen access. So whether the customer is the actual citizen or other customers across your state's entity. So maybe, Kelly, I'm going to throw it back to you, but How are you seeing states and localities really revolutionizing that sort of people-facing portal? And what has been maybe your biggest surprise that you think citizens are seeing as that revolution is happening? Because we know we don't typically associate that people-facing portal with government.
Yeah, I think, all these states and agencies are really, inching closer and closer to what we experience when we shop online, order a DoorDash, et cetera. The example that comes to mind as kind of a real world example is we work quite a bit with North Carolina. We support North Carolina DMV and then also have a footprint in several counties. And one of the things that has been kind of, almost magical, I think, there is if you are in North Carolina and you live in one of these counties, your experience with the DMV is deeply connected when you go and pay your property tax, for example, in Cabarrus County. And you have this kind of one experience, this one wallet, your documents are there, and so on. And so that's kind of an interesting example of how both states and local agencies can kind of work together and deliver this very seamless experience, which I think, really mirrors sort of what you expect from your, sort of private sector life, all of your online experience. It's a much more similar experience. And then what we've seen is, as we add, new county level agencies in North Carolina, having that wallet in place already is just this, kind of built-in adoption tool, because they've maybe already interacted with MV to renew their license or so on. And then it's all happening right there in this one kind of singular experience.
Yeah, so one wallet, that's a great example of, things that are probably a surprise, right? Michael, how about in South Carolina? Just as our warm-up question, like what's something that you are working on that really is kind of revolutionizing the experience?
Well, probably twofold. We're working on getting the government entities, state government entities, as well as across the county and the local municipalities to share roadmaps, to embrace this idea that if we align from a initiative standpoint, then it gives us better visibility as the provider to hit the mark. There's a couple of examples, one being, that I know today there's a couple different kinds of citizen groups, one being the ones that expect and need the technology interface with their government, and the other ones that they may not need it, and they may not even know that they want to have that, but they're interested. They're investigating this with some trepidation. Like interacting as they do in their private lives with government. It's not necessarily traditional. We're in the deep South. There's a lot of caution from different demographics on engaging government online, if you will, through different interfaces, and that's part of the challenge. So if we can get the entities, government entities, kind of working together on sharing roadmaps and ideas and where they want to be, that helps us hit those marks along the way. And then if we can have programs and education and communication from government to citizens to reduce that potential pause or cautious attitude, then that'll bring them to it. And that does make the programs much richer.
Yeah, sharing is important. We'll talk about challenges, I'm sure, as we go through the discussion. So Ashley, something that's not, been maybe, typically associated with government that the state of Maryland is engaged in.
Well, when I hear the word revolutionizing, it's a little scary in government, right? Because I think what's revolutionizing for government is not necessarily bleeding edge for any of the rest of the world, right? For us, just the idea of customer, I'm a millennial, just barely, right? And even I do not want to actually talk to a human being for most of the transactions in my life anymore, right? Like I want to be able to go on the internet and I want to like download whatever I need, pay for it, and that be done. I don't want to have a conversation. And as even younger generations than me are even more that way. And so, just having these customer facing portals where you can understand quickly the forms or the processes you need to follow in an automated fashion, be able to submit the information that you need to submit, upload the documents you need to upload, and then pay for whatever licensing fee or permitting fee you're trying to write. I mean, that is revolutionary in government, even though the rest of the world has been doing that, since Amazon, 15 years ago. So it's, for us, I mean, the more processes that are paper-based and that are centered around having citizens have to come to offices. Like, that is surprising and delighting citizens, not having to do that. So that's a big focus for the state of Maryland right now.
Yeah, well, we'll steer clear of the word revolutionize going forward in the discussion.
I mean, it's revolutionary for us.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, I think just having citizens being able to not have to physically go to a building, right, is a big step. Which actually, I'll just stick with you, Ashley, if you don't mind, as we go through into the next question, which is, how are your teams really looking at modernizing those public facing portals, right? To prevent folks from having to stand in a line at the DMV or, what have you, right? There's more demand for that. So what are some of the tactics that you're taking?
So I think sometimes IT tends to be a little bit of a silo, right? And we don't necessarily always recognize the IT innovations that other agencies that don't have the focus of IT are doing. And, I'll give a good example. The Department of the MBA in the state of Maryland is doing a pilot for digital ID, right? And their use cases are at 2 of the airports, right? And, so you have this electronic token that represents your driver's license. And, that's really cool, right? Because you don't have to carry around your driver's license. If you want to go to the airport, you don't have to worry about losing it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I carry it in my hand and I clutch it like it's a piece of gold because I think I'm going to drop it because you never take it out for anything. But things like that, the Department of IT, that's not our project, but we want to partner with them to say, look, let's integrate that into our one-stop portal. So when somebody's applying for a hunting license and they need to, scan their driver's license and upload the piece of paper that has the front and the back, and that's a whole, pain. And who has a printer anymore at their house? And that's just a pain. So if we can start incorporating the use of some of these innovations that other agencies are doing and work together, I mean, a lot of like what Mike said, I mean, that's a big piece of it. We're not going to have all of the ideas, especially since IT isn't necessarily the people who are actually working with the citizens, right? We need to listen to the agencies that are directly working with the citizens. So, that business relationship management team that we have here at Do It, like that's part of their role, is to be talking to the agencies that work directly with the citizens, say, what are you doing to solve your business problems with IT? How can we help you do it better? Also just kind of running ideas by people. Like we come up with all IT nerds, right? We come up with all sorts of like crazy ideas and we think they're great, but actually like throwing those against a wall with the other agency and saying, would that even be useful to you? I mean, the greatest idea we come up with, they're like, we don't want that. Like, doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work for our business process. So I would say most importantly is our citizens are our end customer, but really they're our customer's customer. So making sure we're talking to those other agencies.
Right. And not letting it just be IT working without those conversations to fill in behind them on what they're trying to build and do. So, I mean, that goes right to Mike, what you were talking about with, that sharing component. What are some of the efforts going on with your teams in this regard?
Yeah, I appreciate what Ashley said. I was nodding my head in agreement the whole time. And I guess what I would add is, at least from our perspective too, like, technology, you see it first in the private sector, in your personal life, and you go, wow, that is really cool. And then all our technology people and our vendor community who we closely partner with, we see a lot of value in that to again, get out the feelers and have more eyes and ears on the ground to play back to us what they're seeing, not just industry, but with their customers. Because a lot of these agencies who serve the citizens already have tremendous customer bases and product maturity across other areas. So, just trying to listen is very important. But I'm also mindful, I'm also mindful that we rush forward. Everything's about vision and future and embracing all these new things that, at least from our perspective here, it's important for us to also take those steps backward to make sure that what we are rolling out, appreciating our wide demographic and that it's simple. It has to be simple to use. We have a lot of technology and a lot of widgets and a lot of options, and everybody tends to turn them all on because it looks cool and there's a lot of whiz bang, stuff, and it gets a lot of attention. But it'd be important to remember that the citizens, the thing that we want to do is keep it simple, because the more simple we keep it, the broader group of people, overall that will embrace it, in our opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, so Mike, just sticking with you for a minute on to that point, in our prep for this, we talked a little bit about how obviously the pandemic changed a lot of the approach to this and it had to be done quickly. But to your point, keeping it simple, but how do you prioritize, right? The access to the digital services. I mean, I don't know what you're doing in South Carolina in that regard, but how are you prioritizing that access, especially because post-pandemic, there is an expectation for it quickly?
Yeah, well, the way we're prioritizing it here is looking at what we learned from COVID specifically. And one of the things we learned is, as a state, our governor noticed it. We all noticed it as citizens ourselves and as government employees. And that's that, okay, this is unusual circumstances to say the least. And I need as much information as I can from my remote desktop. In other words, we completely, took the physical landscape of brick and mortar out of the equation like never before. So it wasn't even an option for the broad majority of the population to go and talk with somebody face to face. So it created a really unique perspective, and one that showed us that, we've got a lot of information in a lot of different places. And so to prioritize, we can't pick a DMV who might be, the one agency that probably touches the most people most of the time. You really can't live in the state of South Carolina, or probably any state, without engaging at some point with the identity provider and motor vehicle records entity. Ours is DMV, others go by different names, obviously, but that's great to embrace that and realize that, but it's just as important that someone can pay their utility bill in a remote county of the state. So we're trying to prioritize by rather than trying to pick an entity or a business unit and focus on that, rather try to pull together multiple entities into single panes of glass. So in South Carolina, we have sc.gov as our homepage. And we're trying to leverage that as a one-stop or a single pane of glass where citizens can come and interact with multiple entities, regardless of what they want to accomplish from a business standpoint, and at least have one place to go where they can get information, and if they want to actually interact with government online. I know that's probably been around for a long time, like it's already been mentioned. We tend to be very methodical, I'll call it, in government, and it takes a little longer, but that's something that we're still working on.
Yeah, so prioritizing that single pane of glass for the citizens. Actually, I just want to jump back to, something you mentioned that's, very important to the role that you have, which is, bridging that gap between the state agencies and central IT, right? And building that team of portfolio managers to bridge that gap. Maybe just talk for a minute before we shift a little bit to how did you come about with that process? Could this be a model for other states that are, when we're talking about not just going to the citizen, but, with the other agencies being your customers?
Yeah, I came from the private sector. I've been at the state about 4 years, and I was actually brought on to do the Department of IT's business relationship management practice, and we call them portfolio officers. But so I was just an army of one, 4 years ago. But the first thing I noticed was, well, first of all, there was no centralized intake of customer requests. And so what would happen is, Sally from the Department of Aging would call up Bob over at, the Department of IT and be like, I need a website built. And, Bob works on the telecommunications team. Right. So, but she knows Bob, right. And so Bob would try to help, but it just wasn't working. And also when we started sort of, floating this idea of, hey, you've got this point of contact to talk to you agencies and they can help you get what you need. I mean, my inbox just got flooded, and I'm trying to recruit more people, but I noticed that the email, you cannot be using email or even the phone to be tracking this kind of requests. So, one of the first things we did was say, look, what are the tools that we have available to us? We had ServiceNow, and we just said, we got to set up like an automated ticketing system to be able to track all of these requests. And once we were able to actually get a list of everything we were supposed to be working on, then when we were able to hire those people to actually work the queue, that made that a lot easier. But I didn't know what it was going to look like. I'd never worked for government before, but my background in the private sector, my most recent job had been an account executive for Xerox. And so it turns out it's the same exact thing, right? You got to listen to people, what's going wrong, and you got to try and fix it. And you also got to talk to people about what their needs are, so that you can kind of start, doing some long-term planning with them. But really, I sat down with my team and I said, look, you got to like to talk. You got to have the gift of gab. You got to have a smile on your face, even when you're upset. And this is a people job, right? You have to have enough of an IT, understanding to be able to talk effectively and intelligently about IT. But most people that call in and want something from IT don't really care how it works. They don't want to know the technology behind it. They just want to talk to a human being about their business problem. And so we've really spent the last 4 years like honing that ability of being that liaison between IT and the business. And, it's been a huge transformation. I won't sit here and say that at the beginning it was roses, right? I mean, the operational teams didn't like us because we were shedding light on some of the problems that the organization had. And some of the agencies didn't trust us because they kind of looked at us like we were salespeople. But over time, we've really become that strategic partner. And there are agencies that talk to their portfolio officer once a day. And, and it's become more of a friendship almost, or, a real partnership. And it's really been amazing to watch.
It's really interesting as you're talking, because how you're solving that problem really is about people actually talking to each other. But on the transactional end, that is, everyone's, even all of these customers' goal at the end is that transaction for the citizen. They just want to pay their bills. They don't want to have to talk to a person. We mentioned that in the beginning. So Kelly, I want to shift to you, because having that private sector viewpoint here is, like I said, at the end of the day, the transactions that every state agency is working to produce are really transactional, and they're really about just paying something online or doing something online. I know that recently there was a survey that Payit did along with the Center for Digital Government. And I think, if I recall right, I mean, over like half of state and local government customers are paying their government transactions online now. But a lot of those folks do not have that modernized payment experience, even if it's online. I mean, that's some of the complaints that we've heard, I think, out of that survey where, oh, there's just too many steps. There's so much manual information entry. The site, you sort of fill in a whole bunch and then the site doesn't perform what it's supposed to do. So what is your exposure as you're working with your customers and with states and localities about, how different governments are going about that? Where can agencies start to address some of that, given the just massive increase in transactional online activities by citizens?
Yeah, I think there's a real gap here. I think the other thing that was interesting in that survey was we learned that residents actually had fairly low expectations. So their satisfaction was actually pretty high, even after using a really, really clunky website to complete a transaction. They probably wouldn't ever say, oh, that was as easy as ordering an Uber, but, it got the job done ultimately. But, there's a couple of like interesting themes that I think I would pull out from some of that. One is, and, Ashley and Michael would know this, even better than me, but, there's always a build versus buy thing that you're thinking about, right? And, there is a lot happening in private sector that can be brought in if you're making a buy decision instead of a build decision. But also if you build, there's a lot, there's a great playbook to copy. And I think, a couple of the things that make it really challenging to deliver that experience, you got to have people who have a job that is focused on the user experience, right? And that's a luxury that not every agency has, having people who are like, oh, we got to make a great customer experience. And then we need to design this experience around that end user. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is like transactions, when they're really, really simple, it's because there's a bunch of complexity that's obscured, right? So if you're building one of these, you're hooking together a website with a form interface, with a payments gateway and a payments processor, and you're managing security and compliance and all this stuff, and kind of having to pull all those things together. And so, particularly in a world of resource constraints, if you can find a partner who kind of can bring all of that to the table, it simplifies a lot of stuff and then makes it a lot easier to deliver kind of that elegant experience. And then I think the last theme that really, I think we keep kind of coming back to is this notion of people expect the government to know them. And they actually, there's lots of research, not that necessarily that we did, but elsewhere, that people actually have, trust in the government to protect their information and their data at a pretty high level. And so they're comfortable, saying, here's who I am, but they want to be remembered, right? And so that, whether it's a, kind of a wallet experience where your identity or your receipts and your documents and your history with those agencies or multiple agencies is stored, that, kind of rich experience sort of solves for that. And when people are, it's similar to healthcare, right? Like, I wonder, Michael, if you encountered this too. It's like every single time I go to the doctor, I have to refill out forms. And I'm like, you have all this in that computer, right? And so it's the same thing in government. People are like, you know me, you gave me this social security number, or you gave me this driver's license, right? And so they really expect to be known. And so thematically, I think that's kind of where we need to go. And it's tricky to get there. It takes time, right? There's a lot of hard bits of that. And so, we always, when we're talking with, clients or potential clients, it's, and they're kind of weighing this, like, do I just build this thing? Do I buy this thing? Who's the right partner, et cetera? These are the kinds of topics that we usually engage with them on.
I kind of want to, that's a really interesting point about you want the government to know you. And that's something we're exploring in Maryland too, not from necessarily, also from the data collection, not having to re-enter a bunch of information, but also, I struggle as a private citizen knowing what agency at the government even does the things I need it to do, right? So, like, for example, in the state of Maryland, we have emissions inspections for, our vehicles in the, annually, whatever. And my car, I drive a very old car. My car failed this year. And so I wanted to request a waiver. And so I'm like all over the MDOT site, right? The transportation site, trying to find this waiver form. And I cannot find it. And I finally Google it, and it's like, oh, the Department of the Environment manages that part of the emissions. Right. But if I just was able to go to one place and just type in like emissions waiver, I don't even care what agency issues it. I just need to fill out the form. And one of the things so that's kind of part of it. But then also, I feel like, at least in Maryland, we have tried to modernize agencies or modernize systems instead of thinking about modernizing the citizen experience. And what I mean by that is, okay, if I'm, like, why aren't we thinking about it from a business, from a citizen use case? So if I'm a single parent with that's maybe, a lower socioeconomic class, right? If I'm logging in and I'm looking to how to apply for temporary cash assistance, right? Also show me the subsidized housing programs that you have. Also show me the homeowner's tax credit. Like, also show me these things that I might also qualify for. Know who I am as a human and the other things that I might be interested in, right? Instead of just saying, oh, well, you logged in and you're at the Department of Human Services, so we're only going to like take you around the Department of Human Services. So I just thought that was really interesting. Like, I'm going to use that now. Like, the government should know you. I like that. So
I love the notion of like building the Banana Republic outfit of government services. Oh, you might like this purse to go with this dress. I'm sure.
I love that. Right.
Oh, yeah, I do too. Upsell them.
Well, what you're talking about is Michael, your single pane of glass, right? But then have that single pane of glass also be smart. And Michael, what about, in South Carolina, that same survey that we were just talking about with Kelly I think it says that there's about 60% of everyone of all the state and local agencies they surveyed and then are hoping to get even more transactions online this year. There's like a big increase. I mean, how much of that is going into the single pane of glass? Are there some agencies that are really focused on this maybe, and others that are taking it a little bit slower?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So I think all have it on their radar, how close it is in their sites, it just kind of depends. I mean, obviously, in government, we get to deal with budgets, sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you think they're going to be there and then they're not when you need them. And the whole fiscal cycle can, quite honestly, interrupt what a private sector would just call a project with continuity. We have those challenges. So, I mean, yeah, so the single pane, so the other word other than revolutionize that we used earlier was seamless. That one, I love the word. I don't know that I have ever really seen that totally be in its purest form, seamless. And where I'm going with that is, we have to continue to try to strike a balance between the agency's desire and need to be autonomous in their business units and in their citizen engagement. Because what I've learned in government is that there's like a culture that is within an agency and their constituents. And so you multiply that times 30 agencies, and some are in the governor's cabinet, some are not. In one breath, we may be dealing with the court system, and that's in a different branch of government. So the things that may work within the cabinet agencies to get people aligned and come to a common platform may be only entertaining to some outside, and they have their own plans. So I love that. I gotta say, I love that phrase too, Kelly. The government should know. One thing that we're doing to take a step forward in that is, and it's not just specific to South Carolina, but we're really embracing this idea of a personalized experience. So, for the sites to become smart, and for us to be able to offer up suggestions that are like interagency suggestions through that pane of glass to a single citizen, we can collect data through tools. We can analyze that data, and then through releases and aligning with the roadmap, we can make our sites smarter. But in order to do that, you have to, when the person comes to the site, that pane of glass needs to recognize you when you come back, and then each time that experience should become richer. And then the idea is that when that starts to kind of take in that citizen experience, then we're getting more information about that individual's interactions on the site or sites, and we can offer suggestions. I mean, in our personal life, private sector, I mean, I'm amazed at what Apple knows about me, even though I check all the boxes that say no, don't share my stuff with Apple or anybody else, but somehow Apple knows that I just was talking about something yesterday, and there comes that. I don't know how it happens, but I don't think we're ever going to get there or want to get there in government, but absolutely that personalized experience, being able to create an account, and we're working on that diligently. We hope to get that functionality later this year. It will be a balance though between, again, getting rid of those fears that citizens may have, whether it's government or otherwise, and taking that week to create an account, which should be simple, it should be harmless, and there should be plenty of options for what kind of information they would like to see and or share. And that's our approach.
Yeah, well, I heard in your response there, Michael, several challenges too, and maybe Ashley wants to add to those, because it wouldn't be a good discussion if we didn't, talk about the things that are standing in our way. But I heard fiscal cycles and I heard culture, which of course we hear all the time. But maybe Ashley or Kelly, for either of you, what are some of the other challenges, right, to doing this? We know what everybody wants to achieve, but what else do you think is sort of at the top of the challenge list?
Let Ashley go first. I would love to hear her POV.
Oh, so I mean, from the government side, and I was going to actually jump in and ask Mike if he had the same thing. I mean, we still have people who are like state workers who are afraid of change, right? I mean, I'm afraid of change. We all are on some level, but I think it goes even deeper when you're talking about, people who have been doing the same job that administers a paper-based process. They've been doing it for 25, 30 years, and they're worried that they don't have a place, right, to finish out their tenure at the state if everything goes automated. And that's a real concern for people. And, I definitely believe that the government, part of its role is to provide jobs. And so that is a consideration. So, in tandem to modernizing and changing what people do every day at their job, you have to figure out a way to reskill and provide training on the new systems, and so that you can keep those people employed and happy, and they just have a new mission. But there's a lot of, no, it's fine. Our paper-based process works. Like, we're good. Nothing to see here. We don't need your help. So, I mean, that's something we combat a lot. Also there's mistrust, right? Because to Mike's point, our one-stop portal you do create an account, And what's great about that, creating an account, is that you can actually look at the status of your application. Like if you applied for something, which is almost unheard of in government. There's things that I've applied for that you just wait until you get a letter in the mail, and it could be like 6 months, or you don't know. It just comes magically one day, right? But at least in the One Stop portal, you can see where it is in the process. But there are some, demographics or user base that like don't want to create an account, which we didn't even think about, right? We did a project with the Department of Natural Resources. They wanted to have an online parks reservation portal, right? So you could go in and like, I want to reserve a pavilion for this day or whatever. And it turns out there's a large segment of the population in Maryland that does not want to have a government record of them reserving a park, right? So they don't want to use an account. And that's the way we had set up our One Stop portal. You have to create an account. So how do you do that? Do you create this like anonymous user for certain things? In which use cases do you allow that? I mean, so there's kind of like, I think the trust on the citizen side, you've got to win them over to say like, do I want more of my information shared with the government or less? And then, but also there's also the trust on the actual agency side. Like, are you going to help me still maintain my productivity, still be able to do my job, still be useful here, even though you're automating my job? And that scares me, right? So I think it's trust on both sides.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it's the government, to our previous point, the citizens expect the government to know who they are, but not all their habits,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Not certain habits. So Kelly, go ahead. What's your thoughts hearing that?
Yeah, there's no like, Alexa, please pay my property tax, right?
Yeah.
There's a limit. I think the trust theme is a huge one. And just kind of thinking a little bit about what Ashley said on this whole notion of, do you have an account, and this one, kind of identity, with or without the notion of a digital ID, but like this identity or this persistent persona with the government. And there's a ton of value in that, both for the end user and for, the network of agencies and jurisdictional levels and so forth, and that's a great unlock. But at the same time, I think there are people who are like, I just want to do a guest checkout, right? Like, I have a daughter who, asked me to buy her something for prom. And it was like, some site I knew I was never going to buy anything again or whatever. And I was like, just use my shop, identity. I don't want to create an account with this thing and get all your emails and do all the stuff, right? And so I think it's a question of presenting the benefit of, hey, if you create this account for your park shelter, we can also translate that into, you'll be able to see the status of your reservation, and you can access other services and so on. And like, kind of making those benefits clear is important, because people are sort of like, why do I need to make a password? It's just a pass shelter, right? A park shelter, right? And so there is definitely a tension there. And we have absolutely encountered some of that change resistance as well in the workforce. And, it ends up being this, great unlock when we can kind of get in and partner with an agency and, teach them how to use our, kind of agency through facing tools and things like that. And then they end up being happy, right? But it is, certainly a challenge. And there's a change management dimension of all of this.
One of the things as I'm listening is that there is a challenge that isn't necessarily the customer facing one, but that's the complexity of all this. And how do you provide all these options and the nuance of it all, to the citizens or to your customer? And it brings up something we talked about, Kelly, earlier, which is there's sort of the difference between the IT and, and then what the citizen actually just wants to be able to do. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, we have this back-end system, right, which supports all of these applications, all of this complexity that citizens are asking for in these transactions, right? But then we also just have that front-facing portal, which is sort of what we've been talking about, right? That, their access to the benefits and the services. Do you have to modernize both, right? Because part of this complexity is, it's kind of easy to maybe make the interface simple, but what's happening on the back end with IT? Does modernization require doing both? Can you do one without the other? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I know that's something that's important to, what you're doing with your customers at Payit.
Sure. I mean, I think that like modernizing everything is the North Star, right? And getting all of the real efficiencies in place requires that you do both. But when we're, kind of engaging with different agencies and talking with them, I think we encounter two things. One, a belief that you can't modernize the front end because of tech constraints that you might have on the back end. In other words, they're doing these kind of long, complex back end modernization projects that are measured in years, not months. And they think that there isn't actually technically a way to be able to deliver that on the front end. Or they realize these are sort of separate projects that can operate in parallel, but they just don't have the resource to do it, right? They can't divert IT resources out of the back end into the front end and drive those projects. So that again brings up that build versus buy question, the level of customization, et cetera. But I think, in the world of APIs and file transfers and so on, we've been very, I think we've been pleasantly surprised over the years, and our clients have been pleasantly surprised at, we can integrate and speak to and create this, lovely, elegant experience on the front end that sort of obscures the spaghetti bowl on the back end. We even interface with a command prompt interface, dusty old, tower sitting under somebody's desk in one agency. And, one of my favorite expressions is love finds a way. And so maybe that's appropriate here. But, it's a tough challenge. But I think, when you can kind of decouple those and think about them differently and pace them differently, it helps you accelerate that customer experience. And then getting that win also makes it easier to sell in other projects, right?
Yeah, Michael, maybe just tagging on to that. I mean, one, obviously, comment if you want to, but if an agency is really, really focused on just the front facing, the customer facing portals, right? And those services, does that have a trickle down effect that is improving that back, productivity? Does the spaghetti need to be unscrambled? Will it naturally as part of that process of modernizing the customer facing portal?
Yeah, I really think it does. I mean, the citizen experience is the stuff that the visionaries and the leadership of these agencies and executive leadership at the government level, their focus is like, how can we improve, that experience? That's good for the state. And so that seems to be the prominent push. I've got a couple projects right now where we're working with some very large agencies that citizens interact with on a daily basis, high volume payment transactions and otherwise. And what has happened is, as we're looking for ways to better serve the customers that still choose to walk in brick and mortar and extend, the online or the web presence, improve the experience to those who already have it, and then even through other initiatives like our broadband initiatives to get it out to even more places it doesn't exist. And education, what's happening in that effort and others is that, you're improving this front end experience, and you'll at times experience limitations to what you can do. And the limitations come from those back end systems. So in order to do that front end improvement, it forces you to maybe look at the back end legacy systems, I'll call it, to see, could we start to improve that, and people agencies typically don't, those are like, in the private sector, it might be an every 10-year project. In government, it could be an every 25-year project to even touch that stuff, because a lot of the people that wrote the code are retired, moved on, and nobody wants to peek behind the covers and see what makes that thing actually work. So we just kind of stay on the fringe of it. And we use APIs, right? And we exchange information, but we don't go in there. And I will say, I think the point is absolutely true that we're seeing specific examples where we're trying to improve that user experience. And, our partners in vendor communities will say, yeah, if you only could do this a little differently on the back end, then we could really open up some doors on that front end experience. And that's helping. I mean, that's helping us remove some of those fears and try to work through it. Major overhauls are just rare. They're just rare. In 30 years of doing this, I've been a part of 3 major overhauls. Where you really took apart a system, because they're people don't like to do it, and they take a long time to do. It's a lot of risk and a lot of long-term impact. But yeah, I think absolutely that's helping. Yes.
Yeah, Ashley, I think back to the beginning of the conversation and that bridge that or the gap that you are looking to bridge with the sort of portfolio managers that work in between. I mean, are you seeing that trickle down effect as well there between, what's trying to be achieved for the customer versus the productivity on the back end as well?
One of the things the state of Maryland, I think, had some foresight in our contracts, like our master contracts that support this effort, is that they're not focused on specific technologies. They're more focused on scope. So, our contracts are sort of have a wide berth. It's modernization, it's intake and workflow, it's forms automation. So we are able to address sort of that back end as well as the front end. And we've done projects, where we've started with the back end. We've done projects where we started with the front end, and it's really dependent on where the agency is. We've had a very recent example. We just had an administration change, and an agency, the governor actually split the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission out from the comptroller's office. Well, all their data is in the comptroller's tax system, and so they no longer can do that. So we have to build the back end first. We don't have time to deal with the front end because we got to architect that and figure out how that's all going to work. We just need a place to house their data. But what's good about those situations is that we can build the back end in a way that's going to work very well with a modern front end as a phase two. So, unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. I agree with Mike, right? It'd be great if like every project is we're going to do the whole thing because we have unlimited time and unlimited money and everybody's on board with the project, but it's rarely that. I would also say that in the inverse, we've kind of sold agencies a little bit more on modernization because of the front end. Because what'll happen is, you have this paper-based process where the team that receives all these paper forms, they're sitting on somebody's desk, and management doesn't really know how big the backlog is, right? But as soon as you start getting it in a modern front end where there's a queue that says, okay, we've got 2,000 applications that have not been reviewed yet. Like, why is that? You start seeing that, well, maybe it's a problem with our back end processes. Like, what's going on back of the house? Do we not have enough staff? Is the legacy mainframe system just not keeping up, surprisingly, right? So, and that can help sell, right? That can help sell, okay, maybe we need to go find some money to replace some of these back end systems so we can fully utilize the effects of the modernized front end. I mean, the best selling point, right, is when now you have a citizen that can actually see where their application is, and then they start calling you and be like, it's been there for 42.5 days. Like, why isn't it processed yet, right? I mean, that does kind of jumpstart the state to think about what they're doing from a business process perspective. But speaking of that, I think that's a big challenge that at least our state, the Department of IT has. It's really difficult to find people who are skilled in business process re-architecture, right? Because I don't know, Mike, if you've seen this, I get so many agencies that say, fine, you can modernize my back end, but I want it to work exactly like my back end works today. And it's like, well, that's not what we want to do, right? We want to, because that process was created basically the same year that the Commodore 64 was issued. So let's maybe rethink of that, right? We might be able to do things better. So that's also a challenge that we face.
Yeah, I like the Commodore 64 reference, appreciating that not all of our audience members may actually know what that is, but I
Showing
do.
my age.
I do. Yeah, it's great points. I would add to the internally, I'll give you an example. So do we automate for efficiency, or do we automate the existing? And we had a recent example. This is eye-opening to me every day. That one of the initiatives, let's digitize these forms so that the data can be useful, and people aren't going to lose jobs. It's just going to be a different process, and just the resistance, mostly because of the fear, common theme here today, that if you digitize these forms, I don't understand anymore where the information is going. I don't understand how I'm going to receive it, and so. Decision made in this example, we're not going to digitize them right now. And so we continue to, digitizing a form is really a light lift and a mature interface for the users, and it's proven, but not all pockets. And this is truth be told, this is within my own agency. Whether it's fear of the unknown or the sensitivity of the data, and I appreciate all those things, but that's a key piece, right? Get away from PDF links and things like that, because links break, links change. It's a huge maintenance nightmare when statute dictates a change that affects maybe 50 forms, and now all your PDF links across all your sites have to be changed. You can see where that goes. The other thing I wanted to mention real quick, because I know we're getting short on time, is the other driver, and you mentioned it a couple of times, is the security. So, I'm one of those ones that I just trust, encrypted, secure online transactions. And I don't care if it's government or private, that's just me. But that's another driver. So like the internal systems, the upgrades, the need to do those things can help both the front end and the back end side, but also a tremendous amount of pressure to meet security controls, which constantly are more stringent. And a lot of times our systems, the thing that actually makes things happen is when the budget aligns with, the fear. Like, we cannot continue to operate like this because it's just too risky from a security perspective. And that, I leverage that. I mean, because obviously government has to protect citizen data. I mean, I think everybody would agree with that. But yeah, we in South Carolina, I mean, our security team is the fastest growing team across the board. And I found it very beneficial to link up and be right there hand in hand with what their initiatives are, because that really helps us drive change through another avenue. Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yes, we are getting a little tight on time, but you've brought up a couple things there that we could do a whole nother webinar on and discussion on. And I think, I may have actually in the past, just the security piece and alone, there's so many components of that, but I'm glad that you got it in and mentioned it here. So clearly, as we wrap, we've got, the customers for state and local agencies, whether it's a citizen or another agency, everyone is looking for an experience that just basically resembles more closely what they're doing every day online in the commercial world or in the private sector. Of course, that includes payments, but extends beyond. We talked today about reservations or other paperwork, other services that folks need. I can say from my own experience, I would love it if they got the dog license online, in my locality, right? But what advice, as we close, do all three of you have to offer agencies and other state and local entities that are listening today as they're creating these more consumer-like experiences? I'll use the word seamless, but those seamless single pane of glass online experience for their customers. And maybe Ashley, we start with you.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest, I would have two pieces of advice. One being just start, right? Like I think when we've talked so much about legacy systems and how do you modernize and the money that it takes and the adversity of change, but just like start with one thing, right? Even if you just start with one form or one process that is a pain point for you and it's maybe highly utilized, just try that and just see how it goes, right? You don't have to commit to doing everything, make incremental progress. And then you can learn from that. With that first time, right? I also think, and I know I didn't fully answer an earlier question that I was asked about, can other agencies benefit from this model of having, these business relationship managers, not just IT? I mean, absolutely, right? I think that would be my other piece of advice. Like, all agencies need to start thinking about, how do I consistently and continuously gather feedback from whoever your customer base is, whether that's the citizen or whether that's another agency. Like, how do I understand what I'm doing right? How do I not, understand what I'm doing wrong? And maybe getting creative and going back to basics. Cause I don't know about everyone else, but when I almost always click like no when it's like the online survey, even if it's like 3 questions, like I'm just not doing it. But I would totally talk to somebody if someone stayed on the line and asked me. So just kind of getting back to like being a little bit more human, with that and developing that business relationship practice in your own agency with your own customers, I think would be my other piece of advice.
Hear that word human again, right? Kelly.
It's the same thing. It's start, kind coming from my point of view, where it is very resident focused, it's start with the end user in mind and really build around what that should be like, and then use that to drive requirements.
Michael, you get the final word.
Gosh, well, I totally agree with Ashley and Kelly, especially with the just start and just maybe get it. I like the old school approach too. Get it your round table with your peers in the agency. Try to pull in some other trusted folks that have a similar vision from other agencies, and don't be afraid to embrace the idea of a pilot. We make a lot of progress. Lessons learned are super valuable through pilots where it's not this huge investment or commitment. You can kind of do it behind the scenes with a small test group. And we found a lot of relationships that turn into much bigger things with the vendor community that's willing to help us kind of execute on a pilot at a lower no cost as an entry point. And that's been really helpful.
Well, great. So much great information from all of you today, but we are at time. I want to thank all of you for your time and for your participation in today's discussion. I'd like to especially thank Payit for sponsoring and supporting this program. We greatly appreciate, as well as everyone's insights. Don't forget, if you have any questions for our speakers, you can drop them in the Q&A boxes and we'll share an email response with you. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar.